Kia ora, good morning everybody. It's lovely to be here. So hugging the cliff face and the flowering of inner courage. It's an interesting topic and theme, and long ago Aristotle, he said the roots of education are bitter, but the fruits are sweet. Now this sentiment applies equally as well concerning our search for enlightenment. There amongst the roots of the lotus flower, each aspirant undergoes many difficult trials. Why is this happening to me? Why me? Have you heard yourself say these words, utter these words a few times? Maybe you shake your head disbelievingly. Surely you think, things are meant to get easier now that I'm on the spiritual path, I'm treading this way. Not only that, but the stresses of modern living seem to be even more. There's that word stress, the one thing we have more than enough of. But we have to face the bitter fact that stress is here to stay, and it's part of our way of life. In fact, it's actually part of the quickening of humanity. Imagine, thousands of years ago, nothing much changed. Oxen and men ploughed the fields to the rhythm of nature, and then skip forward a few thousand years. Again, nothing much has changed. There's been a few wars, a few pharaohs have changed here, but there's an endless succession, and the average person's life didn't change much at all. It pretty well stayed the same. Well, this state of affairs no longer exists. The lessons then are not the lessons of humanity today. The wheel of destiny has turned, and in this time of the Kali Yuga, we are all in the pressure cooker, undergoing a rapid expansion of consciousness. Teenage humanity is moving into young adulthood, and it's painful. Many thousands of people are waking up spiritually, and that sounds like good news. So why are we not that ecstatic and excited? The answer is because it's hard, really hard. The grinding hurts because we have been exposed to situations not faced before, which carry fundamental consequences for the planet and humanity. At no time before has humanity been able to shape the planet and our social conditions like we can today. This quickening for some, those relatively few turning to spirit, is called the path of swift unfoldment. It has also been called the path of the burning ground, on which we throw the personality. But note what Roman philosopher Epictetus said. What should each of us say to every trial we face? That is what I've trained for. This is my discipline. Now, returning to the pressures of daily life, two of our companions we carry around with today are stress and conflict, and they're not likely to go away, but maybe they'll get more pronounced in the future. So we therefore have to deal with them, because hiding away in a cave and quiet meditation is no longer an option for the many awakened and awakening souls now toiling in this cycle. We must deal with it, and yet still find in these present moments the possibility to express truth, beauty, and goodness. The latest science reveals that stress can make you smarter, stronger, and more successful. It helps you learn to grow. Stress can also kill. It's a bit like the Buddha's middle way. Whether the stress in our life is harmful or beneficial depends on how we respond to it. While too much prolonged stress is bad for us and can cause physical and psychological damage, being subjected to it has its benefits also, because the blade is sharpened by the grinding. As we've heard, stress is a natural feature in our modern living, but it also is an inevitable side effect of the urge to express the soul. This is because stress produces points of tension in the subtle bodies, paving the way for the rapid growth. If we examine a flower and its petals, we can see the tension before the petals unfold. The tension in the petals of the egoic lotus is no different. Tension, crisis, and their resolution are the cyclic mechanism of soul growth. In fact, writer Boris Cyklinik said that the worst form of stress is an absence of stress, because the feeling that there is no life before death gives rise to a despairing feeling of emptiness in the face of the void. Therefore, when one treads the path with open eyes, looking towards the heights, we also need to ensure one's feet are placed firmly on the ground of realism and rational thinking. We see clearly that the life of a disciple is generally one of storm and stress, in order that qualities and faculties may be forced into swift growth and speedily brought to perfection. These storms are outer happenings, things that impact the personality, but know that it is in the silence and the calm that the soul grows. Now, some say that the soul grows through suffering. This is not exactly so. It's by making mistakes and correcting them that the soul learns to grow. And suffering inevitably is the result of mistakes. But the growth does not take place during the suffering, but afterwards. So a person may feel very much better after a surgical operation, but the improvement does not take place while the operation is performed. In like manner, while people are in the throes of all sorts of terrible difficulties, they're not growing, but by the way in which they meet those difficulties, they may be learning to grow after they have surmounted them. We hear in the book, Light on the Path, it is in the silence which follows the storm that the flower grows. We must have gone through the turmoil of battle, like the warrior Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, before we gain that great reward of victory, the real unfoldment of the soul, which brings with it a calm certainty which nothing again can ever shake. HPB said on this, "Woe to those who live without suffering. Stagnation and death are the future of all that vegetates without change. And how can there be any change for the better without proportionate suffering during the preceding stage? It is in the silence after the storm that the personality humbly offers to the soul, offerings to the soul are made and transmuted into wisdom. It is an unbidden outpouring that seeps into the marrow of the soul, and it is what the soul becomes as it blooms." There's a lovely Taoist meditation that reflects the opening of the egoic petals, which is often a paradox, and it goes like this. Close your eyes and you will see clearly. Cease to listen and you will hear truth. Be silent and your heart will sing. Seek no contacts and you will find union. Be still and you will move forward on the tide of the Spirit. Be gentle and you will need no strength. Be patient and you will achieve all things. Be humble and you will remain entire. I'd like to turn now to the matter of resilience. If we look at the top sports people in their chosen field, staying power is a precursor, a prerequisite. They won't get far if they give up their training or stop competing just because they lose an event or don't win a competition. They just try harder. They train harder, they train smarter. Think of the swimmer who heads to the pool at 4:30 a.m. each morning. The weightlifter who trains and builds constantly the idealised form that they have in their mind. Fitness means coordination of nerves with muscle and increasing the blood flow to the body, carrying oxygen with it, prana, the life force. The mountaineer does not attempt the cliff face without much preparation and hard work, strengthening muscles to steel-like strength and overcoming any vertigo and fear of heights. So too, on the spiritual path, the disciple must withstand the forces that are attracted to him or her, which are associated with the spiritual heights. They must maintain their foothold on the mountain of probation and initiation when the whole hillside seems to be crumbling beneath their feet. Over 2,000 years ago, the Roman philosopher Epictetus wrote, "Every difficulty in life presents us with an opportunity to turn inward and to invoke our own submerged inner resources. The trials we endure can and should introduce us to our strengths. Dig deeply. You possess strengths you might not realise you have. Find the right ones. Use it." And in this endeavour of finding out who we really are and what strengths are ours, we understand that a primary need is to acquire a good measure of courage. Courage is needed to stand firm in the face of adversity. We base our courage on the foundation of values and principles that we have decided is the right way to live, bolstered by the wisdom we can assimilate from the scriptures, philosophers, writers, and poets. Thus we stand in our own light, not in that of others. We become a rock, a pillar, strong and unwavering with our purpose set before us, a purpose that the monad initiated so long ago. The question is, are we ready for this? Manly P. Hall describes the state and whether we are ready to proceed further up the mountainside of spiritual heights. He wrote that until the soul can find perfect joy in giving, perfect companionship in aloneness, perfect sufficiency in the power of truth, perfect abundance of gratitude of the few and the scorn of the many, until such a state is reached, the disciple is not ready to leave the broad road on which the world walks and take the thorn-lined path which leads to conscious immortality. Now, this is not much of an advertisement for the path, I know, but ponder on it a little, and you may come to the realisation that if you are equipped with humility and not pride, the words of others cannot wound you. If you are not wedded to possessions and position, then their removal cannot cause much pain and gives little concern. In this attitude, there's tremendous power and freedom. The problems faced become less daunting, and you know in your heart that the way can be found. As we master these prerequisites, we proceed on the path, although still at many times it does feel like that we are hugging the cliff face over a deep precipice and dodging stray rocks sent by providence from above. But it's in these moments that courage is most needed and courage is found. So what is courage? Well, it's a state or quality of mind or spirit that enables one to face danger, fear, and unforeseen circumstances with self-possession, confidence, and resolute bravery. Courage, however, is not always so straightforward. There are always subtleties in everything. Writer G.K. Chester wrote, "Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. A soldier surrounded by enemies, if he is to cut his way out, needs to combine a strong desire for living with a strange carelessness about dying. He must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water and yet drink death like wine." One of the first and important lessons on courage is to be resolute in holding fast to the principles that we hold dear. Perhaps truth, beauty, goodwill towards others, do no harm, and so forth. Each of us will have our own set of guiding factors. When the opinion of the crowd calls loudly, and friends and family, work colleagues, or calling on you to change your mind and your opinion and do it their way, think carefully. Use the discriminative faculty of reason and listen intently to the inner voice of your higher self, which is transmitted through intuition. If the voice of the many be reasonable, by all means be flexible and change. However, if it goes against your moral and ethical principles, then stand firm. In standing firm, we know the slings and arrows of hostility will likely accompany such a decision. Therefore, the ability to handle stress, possessing a good measure of courage, being steadfast and resolute in the face of adversity, come what may, is very formative of character and the fitting of oneself to travelling deeper towards and onwards on our sacred journey. It bestows the holder of these things with the ability to hold on to the cliff face tightly when all seems lost. I'd like to share a small story on courage at work around overcoming fear. A cowardly man once approached a master of martial arts, asking him to teach him bravery. The martial arts teacher looked at him and said, "I'll teach you under one condition. You'll need to live in the city for 1 month and tell every person you come into contact with that you're a coward." This seemed like a scary task to the man. Living with his cowardice was so unbearable that he decided to travel to the city to accomplish this goal. When he saw the first passerby, he got nervous, lost his speech and couldn't talk to them. However, he had to complete the master's task, so he started to overcome himself. When he approached the first person to tell about his cowardice, he felt he would die from fear. But he got more confident with every passing day until there came a moment when he realised he wasn't scared anymore. The more he completed his master's task, the more he was convinced that he was over his fear. After a month passed, he returned to the master and said, "Thank you, teacher. I finished your task. Now I'm not afraid anymore. But how did you know that this task would help me?" The master replied by telling the man that cowardice is only a habit, and by doing the things that scare us the most, we can negate the stereotypes and overcome our fears. He told the man that bravery is also a habit, so if you want to be brave, you must move forward into your fears. Then the fear will subside and bravery will take its place. In this story, we can see fear as the primary mover and concern. The man faced his demons in the city and triumphed. Fear is one of our biggest barriers and one that holds us back from moving into new spaces that we must enter if we are to expand our boundaries of knowing. Perhaps one fear common to many is this fear of what people think, fear of change, and the insecurity that is attached to it. We need to feel safe and secure so that the boat of one's life is not rocked, or at least not rocked too hard. This, of course, is generally never the case because life throws many unexpected curveballs to us. Helen Keller, who had a most difficult life, she was deaf, blind and could not speak. She wrote on this false notion of security. She tells us security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Helen Keller's viewpoint is something we can all look to work on, which is adjusting our expectations on how we think the universe should unfold with regards to ourselves. Life is for living, not avoiding. So we add to our bag of courage that quality called steadfastness, particularly in the face of the crowd and public opinion. We all want to be liked, But how does fulfilling that desire dovetail with where we are directing our living? A master of the wisdom once wrote to Colonel Olcott, "Brother mine, he who cares for the opinion of the multitude will never soar above the crowd." Holding this attitude can be harder than we think. The crowd can turn into a mob and take life, or public opinion can destroy people's reputation or take one's job. There can sometimes be serious consequences for standing fast. Yet Alexandra Solzhenitsyn, a Russian historian, philosopher, political prisoner, and 1970 Nobel Prize winner for literature, poignantly and famously said, "The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world." He is an example of those courageous individuals who did just this in the oppression of the Soviet era, standing for human dignity and freedom of the human spirit. Mostly, though, it is that evil called gossip in which we need to deal with. In the face of this, courage is definitely called for. Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius thought on this subject a lot, and he wrote his thoughts in a little book called Meditations. He viewed this matters from how we form and hold our points of view. He said, "Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been." The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do, only what you do. Now, he is not saying here to be unfeeling towards others or have a lack of concern, rather that how we think and react or not react is far more powerful than being buffeted like seaweed in the tide. Adding further to our climbing kit is the much needed tool called mind to help us in our decision making in life. We use the mind as it was intended. We use its logic, its reason. We also use its imagination and get lost in abstract ideas and thought. Through the mind's right use, we find a way whereby the critical faculty of discernment is developed and our choices become more thoughtful and mature. When we make choices, we find this might be through a deliberate working out of the options, using the lower mind. Sometimes the answer is injected into our minds without any thought at all. This is the Buddhic nature at play, giving us the answers without any intermediate interference. It's like a dazzling thunderbolt of lightning, and it's there, lodged in our brain or mind. Sometimes in our deliberations, we need to go to a place of silence, perhaps a place where physical silence is also available. Maybe it's just a moment of silence in the stillness of the heart. It's here in these moments that the way can become clearer. In the song Lost Horizon, the lyrics say, "Many miles from yesterday, before you reach tomorrow, where the time is always just today, there's a lost horizon waiting to be found." In this calm centre, which can be found through meditation, we look to make the right decisions in life. Making right choices is an absolutely vital element on the journey of swift unfoldment, but we need to understand for what reason we make them. People often take the easier road, making the easiest choice because it's convenient. But look how much trouble can be introduced into our life by poorly thought out decisions. Sometimes what is hard now is actually the easiest route in the long run. Our choices and responses affect what happened to us in the present and into the future. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, psychologist and philosopher, wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. This is quite profound when we study these words. Our growth and freedom are at stake. Growth of the soul and freedom from karma are two aspects that spring to mind here. The matter of poised consideration and response is therefore very important. If things are not going smoothly for you, you feel attacked or the situation appears overwhelming, perhaps some crisis or shock has hit you. Well, Seer Geoffrey Hodson offers some sound advice for us in these circumstances. He says, remain alone. He cautions us not to respond until perfect detachment and calm exists. Do not reply in haste. Maybe knowing all this puts some pressure on you in your deliberations around choice. Well, if in doubt, you could perhaps try something that I like to do. To help you find the way, put your thoughts against those of the adept, the master of the wisdom you identify most closely with, and try and see if they are one. Ask yourself, what would the master do in this situation? If this approach seems a little too difficult or vague for you, it can be helpful often to view some thoughts from others on this topic. Michael Moore, the filmmaker, he wrote, "The highest courage is to dare to be yourself in the face of adversity, choosing right over wrong, ethic over convenience, and truth over popularity. These are the choices that measure your life. Travel the path of integrity without looking back, for there is never a wrong time to do the right thing." And Robert Kennedy, "Few men are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, the wrath of their society. Moral courage is rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet it is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change the world, which yields most painfully to change." And then we have Clement Stone said, "Have the courage to say no. Have the courage to face the truth. Do the right thing because it is right. These are the magic keys to living your life with integrity." Janis Joplin said, "Don't compromise yourself. You've all you've got." And Anna Singh Nin said, "Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage." And Mother Teresa, "Honesty and transparency make you vulnerable. Be honest and transparent anyway." The writer C.S. Lewis, "Integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching." And Albert Einstein wrote, "The most important human endeavour is the striving for morality in our actions. Our inner balance and even our very existence depends on it. Only morality in our actions can give beauty and dignity to life." And Indira Gandhi from India, "Without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue. You have to have courage of different kinds. First, intellectual courage, to sort out different values and make up your mind about which is the one which is right for you to follow. You have to have moral courage to stick up to that, no matter what comes in your way, no matter what the obstacle and opposition is. For those taking the swifter path of unfoldment, the gentler slopes are left behind much earlier. They seek to go ahead of much of humanity by navigating their way straight up the mountainside. We've seen some of the attributes we need to bring with us along on this climb, and we've glanced at some of the challenges we face externally along the way. But there is another shadow to be dealt with as well, something more internal. It's personal and it's hard to deal with, and one that many of us encounter, and that is loneliness. The ancient wisdom says, "Do not fight loneliness, but take it to yourself and let the waters of suffering roll over you, because if you try and fight them, they will batter you, breaking down your resistance. It is better to yield yourself to the greatest teacher and meet your karma head-on with courage, painful or even terrible as it may be, because know you are upheld even in these times. So what is loneliness? Well, Jeffrey Hodson provides us with a different view, or perhaps definition, of what loneliness and aloneness are. He tells us loneliness is a pathway through the forest of one's lower nature to the aloneness, which is the cleared space in the centre, where the soul is established in the unshakable poise and balance of this direct spiritual illumination. But the personality, it is afraid of pain and suffering, of being alone, of being quiet. It has not yet established its own centre within itself. At various times in our life, we all experience periods of loneliness where we might feel useless and life is arid, our pride is hurt, we are humiliated by constant rebuffs. We might become silent and shrink from the fear of not being wanted. When we become silent through suffering, we are forced to listen to the voice within from the soul. It is now that we forge a pathway inwards to that centre where peace resides. This is because pain cuts away non-essentials of thought, feeling, action and speech. Perhaps we rebel at first. What did I do to deserve this? Life is so unfair. I'm the victim again. At first, this rebellion may help us stand up against the blows of fortune. It may even be a necessary stage of growth and a stiffening of the backbone. But inevitably, we find ourselves in a state of sadness and depression. Some find it overwhelming. This sadness and depression comes from the realisation of our weaknesses and difficulties, yet at some stage we have to face up to them, and all the tender loving and care in the world can't protect and shelter us from the growth of the soul, which is always seeking and even demanding fresh layers of experience. There is a saying, circumstances don't make the man, they only reveal him to himself. The soul actually moulds the life and circumstances of the personality so that such experiences come to pass. We need to realise that they cannot be avoided. It's like the story as retold by Somerset Maugham, with the speaker here being death. There was a merchant in Baghdad who sent his servant to market to buy provisions, and in a little while the servant came back, white and trembling, and said, "Master, just now when I was in the marketplace, I was jostled by a woman in the crowd, and when I turned, I saw it was death that jostled me. She looked at me and made a threatening gesture. Now lend me your horse and I will ride away from this city, and to avoid my fate, I will go to Samara, and there death will not find me." The merchant lent him his horse, and the servant mounted it, and he dug his spurs into its flanks, and as fast as the horse would gallop, he went. Then the merchant went down to the marketplace, and he saw me standing in the crowd, and he came to me and said, "Why did you make a threatening gesture to my servant when you saw him this morning?" "That was not a threatening gesture," I said. "It was only a start of surprise. I was astonished to see him in Baghdad, for I had an appointment with him tonight in Samara." You can see by this, what will come to pass was planned by the soul long ago, and it will come to pass. This idea of pain and suffering and of inevitability is just part of the necessary process which is humanity's to bear. Perhaps elsewhere it is different, but on this planet it's our way. HPB explains the process like this. The idea of growth involves also the idea of disruption. The inner being must continually burst through its confining shell or encasement, and such a disruption must also be accompanied by pain, not physical, but mental and intellectual. And this is how it is in the course of our lives. The troubles that come upon us is always the one we feel to be the hardest that could possibly happen. It is always the one thing we feel we cannot possibly bear. But if we look at it from a wider point of view, we shall see that we're trying to burst through our shell at its one vulnerable point. Every crushing pain is caused by the expansion of some neglected part. When this comes to us, as it will, it is important not to resist and harden oneself, because then you force yourself to be alone when in reality the Master's arms are ever underneath you, supporting you. Jeffrey Hodgson said, "Where the rocks and reefs are, there the surf beats most furiously." He said, "Come off your rock of solitude and separateness and surrender yourself to the waters of life, and they will carry you past the turmoil into the calm and rest of the great ocean of rest eternal. When the ocean is reached, there is the aloneness, which is oneness and union, the rest of the soul in the quiet waters of peace." He goes on to say that after we resign ourselves to the great law, there comes a quiet resignation, a sadness never to be lost. The sadness is the scar of the lesson last learned. This sadness, even in the midst of joy, is the seal which binds the person forever to the depth of aloneness. Sadness is the mark of attainment in the personality through loneliness of pain of that aloneness, which is union with the depth of life. We can see this drama play out in the life of some of well-known people travelling the path, like St. Francis of Assisi, and the striking example of Count Cagliostro. In the study of universal history, there is a strange fascination in the accounts of the numberless martyrs who have been slandered and persecuted with an almost incredibly ferocity because they tried to help their fellow men to a higher ideal and practice of brotherhood and sisterhood. Not the least interesting of these was the extraordinary man known as Alessandro Count di Cagliostro. He first appeared in Authentic History in London in 1776, and thanks to the Inquisition, he vanishes from sight in the papal prison of San Leo in Italy in 1795. During the meteoric career of those 19 years, we see him reaching dazzling heights of glory and wealth and fame. He became a familiar and honoured figure in the best society in Europe. He established innumerable lodges of Egyptian masonry, and with the avowed object of helping humanity to greater freedom in thought and action, elevating and purifying the secret societies so numerous in that age. He was the lifelong friend of many of the greatest and noblest thinkers, such as Goethe and Schiller. He performed many curious psychological experiments, marvellous in the eyes of the ignorant, but now slowly becoming recognised as the results of knowledge of obscure natural laws. He cured multitudes of sick persons of the most dangerous diseases, and is ultimately dragged into the amazing diamond necklace trial in Paris, which involved Marie Antoinette. From this he is released without a stain upon his character. Though beloved and revered by thousands, an enthusiast for humanity, he suffered bitter persecutions from bigots and depraved villains, and he is finally plunged into the utmost depths of misery in a subterranean dungeon where he is supposed to have perished. It's no wonder that so strange and tragical story has never ceased to be the subject of absorbing interest, and that anything new about Cagliostro is sure to attract attention. Never was one more so vilified than Count Cagliostro in the 1700s, whose reputation was ruined, and the brilliant alchemist jailed several times, even chained by the neck through false witness. Now, as one passes through the great initiations, and it is said Cagliostro was a high initiate, these are the trials that the candidate must face and win through. We hear of the glories that await us, and truly they do, but they are to be hard won, just as the Olympic gold medal is hard won. Hence, such importance is placed on the personality acquiring powers of resilience and steadfast equanimity. These two powers, built on the foundation of courage, will lead the candidate safely on to victory, for without them, he or she may be overwhelmed by what lies ahead. We can expect the qualities such as humility, love, and compassion are by then well sown into the fabric of the blossoming soul, petal after petal, unfolding in the course of the ascent to the spiritual heights. While we are exploring some of the challenges we face on our climb, there is, of course, the flip side to the coin. As the cares and stresses fall away in our daily life because we are no longer bothered by the petty knocks and blows, joy becomes an increasing part of who we are. The appreciation of a fresh sunrise, the laughter of a child running and playing in the rain, the gurgling of a mountain stream or calling of the native tui, all find their mark in the aspirant's heart. Higher forces descend on one, and life becomes remarkably different. Our resonance is found with others that thrill to the same energy. Our friend Epictetus advised us, the key is to keep company with only people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best. So here are 6 seed thoughts to take away with you. Feeling fear, yet choosing to act. There is an old proverb which says, fear and courage are brothers. Follow your heart. Marianne Williamson, Return to Love, Reflections on the Principles of A Course in Miracles, wrote, it takes courage to endure the sharp pains of self-discovery rather than choose to take the dull pain of unconsciousness that would last the rest of our lives. Perseverance and resilience in the face of adversity. Author and artist Marianne Radmeister reminded us courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the little voice at the end of the day that says, I'll try again tomorrow. Standing up for what's right. Maggie Kuhn, a social activist, said, speak your mind, even if your voice shakes. Expand your horizons, letting go of the familiar. Lord Chesterfield wrote, man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore. Face suffering with dignity or faith. Viktor Frankl said there is no need to be ashamed of tears, for tears bear witness that a man has the greatest of courage, the courage to suffer. To conclude the small exploration on courage, we can see that by striding bravely so many times amongst the lower mountain passes and plateaus, that when we finally reach the sheer rock face at higher altitudes, one's fingers are now made of steel. For us living upon the middling slopes, We may decry the gales of misfortune descending on our heads from all directions, but really, they are necessary friends in all reality, preparing us for tomorrow, kitting us with the tools of survival and stamina in order to win through on that future day. The adept becomes and is not made. And these are the testing grounds for this. These are the furnaces that transmute base metal into gold, as Cagliostro did. The forge turns the aspirant into initiate, and the initiate into adept. With our eyes firmly fixed upwards, we hug the cliff tightly until the summit is reached. Upon the summit, we let go, having no more need for paths and cliff faces. Before us lie newer and greater possibilities we cannot conceive of, or we may turn back, extend a helping hand to those still toiling and climbing below. In either case, with dauntless courage, our freedom has been won. Namaste.